Well, in early November, the Las Vegas City Council voted 5-2 in favor of a very controversial encampment bill. We spoke with Mayor Goodman about the ordinance. And now, in part 2 of this series, we're talking with homeless and legal experts about implementation of the ordinance. That's today on Nevada Week.
Support for Nevada Week is provided by Senator William H. Hernstadt, Cashman Equipment, and additional supporting sponsors.
Starting February 1st, anyone camping within specific areas in downtown Las Vegas when beds are available at local shelters could be fined or jailed. Mayor Carolyn Goodman proposed the ordinance, saying it's flawed, but it's a start.
We have so many meetings, there have been so many conversations, and here it's been 20 years, and really to say that we're doing something, that we're really helping, it became very clear we aren't.
The ordinance caught national attention, even garnering response from presidential candidates.
I have tremendous respect for Mayor Goodman, had the opportunity to work with her when I was housing secretary. At the same time, I don't believe that people should criminalize desperation and poverty.
Local civil rights groups protested the ordinance, arguing the city cannot arrest people out of homelessness.
Poverty is not a crime.
Poverty is not a crime.
Now, agencies across the homeless spectrum must prepare for implementation. To discuss the path forward and talk long and short-term solutions, we're joined by Shalimar Cabrera, Executive Director of U.S.VETS, Todd Story, Executive Director of ACLU Nevada, Nagai Pindil, Professor at the UNLV Boyd School of Law, and Heather Engel, CEO of the Las Vegas Rescue Mission. Well, thank you very much for being here. We really appreciate it. It's a very, very important discussion. Heather, I wanted to start with you. We mentioned the implementation portion of this, and it is February of 2020. Let's look forward to that point in time. If there are beds available at, let's say, the rescue mission, and we do have homeless in an encampment, what is the process going to be to get those homeless to shelter and services?
Well, I haven't spoken publicly on this for many reasons. Just too much hype around it, and I agree that something needed to be done. So when we're looking at the encampments, as in yesterday even, when ComStat was out there and they were moving people, right? The encampments impact us as well. They impact us on a lot of levels. Everyone that was moved and has been moved, and all the data that we've collected over the past year, has refused services. So, and that's that macro view of a percentage of homelessness that is being looked at as the whole problem. It is a significant issue. It's not going to change the way that we intake anybody or the job that we're going to do with anybody in any way, necessarily. I think that, there's a discussion, do we need more shelter beds? Okay, to a degree, for sure, but that's not the answer. It's an answer for a minute. I believe in long-term case management. I think you can't just put somebody in a situation that they're not ready to be in. So that's where the recidivism shows up in a lot of ways.
Excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt, but when you're looking at what your capacity is now, homeless are refusing services. How close are you to capacity on like a given day?
We are at capacity every day. So, on the clip that we just watched, right, poverty is not a crime. Well, I don't think that that's what this is. This isn't saying that poverty is a crime. This is, and I speak loudly on that as well. There's hundreds and thousands of families that had homes or veterans that they've had a life. Sickness, job loss, lots of things happen. The 8-ball gets big, we have an eviction, we have a foreclosure, children are being pulled out of their schools. That's really a large population that we deal with. And that's the population that I think is not really getting necessarily everything that they need. The focus is on the encampments. And some of the encampments, there's choice in there. And it could be many things. It could be the system failed them at some point. Food stamps can do that, those things can do that. Mental illness, that's my biggest concern. Where are we gonna put those amazing people that don't have somewhere to be today? I'm an alcoholic and an addict. I've worked in this a long time. And we do what we do, right? But the encampment part, as far as defecation and throwing rocks at cars and things like that, that impacts us as well. So, you know, those people have been hanging out, living on our sidewalks for a long time too, but are refusing to come in. We take the stance if we just keep that door open. We engage and keep that door open, hoping to create relationships with them so that at some point they will.
And
But
Heather,
we're at capacity every day.
And you're talking about services here, Shalimar. I want to ask you, the Continuum of Care here is a much broader coalition of really everybody that is touching homelessness.
Yeah.
When you're looking at the services and you're looking at maybe how the ordinance could potentially, hopefully, drive more homeless towards the services, what is the Continuum of Care really doing to prepare for this in February?
Well, here's the thing, the continuum, you know, we're made up of so many different stakeholders, from housing service providers to faith-based organizations, local jurisdictions. So we're really trying to take a regional approach and a really collaborative stance on what true solutions and evidence-based practices are out there to serve our homeless. So the things that we're preparing for, number one, it's hugely disappointing on many different levels that the city is taking this stance, because in effect it does actually criminalize a homeless person who is fined or jailed.
And if I could stop you really quick, I want to ask Nagai, let's talk about that part of this. That is one of the biggest controversies of this ordinance is the misdemeanor charge here, $1,000 fine, potentially 6 months in jail. You know, when we're looking at the misdemeanor, maybe what other cities have done that have had this ordinance, is this the exception to the rule, or are we seeing that the misdemeanor is actually, there are quite a few charges that are happening?
Well, there's certainly quite a few cities across the United States that have criminalized encampments and criminalized homeless. So Las Vegas isn't alone in that respect. And the consequences of having a misdemeanor on your file are many, from potential job prospects to potential shelter prospects. So it's not insignificant at all that someone would be confined, right, in jail or have a record for being homeless.
Todd, homeless that are dealing with potentially misdemeanors on the record, Nagai just mentioned potential job prospects, housing, things like that. The homeless voice here, what could a misdemeanor charge potentially do to homeless?
So there's a number of impacts that can occur when somebody ends up in the criminal justice system. Let me just say that we are opposed to the ordinance, the way that it is written, the way that it was passed, and we're opposed to the ordinance that the City Council is considering right now to force people off of the sidewalks while they're cleaning the streets. So in both instances, we think that there are questions around freedoms, rights, and liberties that are at stake here. We are looking at what that means come February 1st and how that's going to impact the population that is downtown that needs these services. I don't think that the way that you help somebody is by hobbling them from the beginning. You have to give them something. You have to meet them where they are to determine, as was said, you know, are these people addicted? Are they mental health issues that they're dealing with? Are there health issues, economic, job security issues? All of the questions that we have to ask as a community, we have to keep having those conversations in order to come up with the solutions. The problem is that the solutions have never followed the conversations. And so we have to ensure that that happens, and that's what we need to go back to the table as a community, as a region, and decide how we're going to solve this problem once and for all.
Yeah, can I add to
Shalimar,
that?
please, yes.
You know, I think that there was a good quote in an article from the National Alliance to End Homelessness about when local governments turn to criminalizing the homeless or imposing these types of ordinances, it's really because it's a last resort without any other way to address the issue. And I think that's really what we're seeing here. Because as a continuum, we know that affordable housing and permanent supportive housing programs are actually working. Those are the solutions at work in our community. And for us homeless service providers on the continuum, we feel truly left out of this conversation if the government felt that this was the only way to go and there wasn't other means to address homelessness. They exist already. You know, I think the mayor I don't know which clip we're going to show, but the mayor in her interview talked about the fact that chronically homeless individuals would never be ready for housing. They would ruin the entire place. And that's actually not what we're seeing. We're seeing chronically homeless individuals in some of our programs, our U.S.VETS program alone, who've been out in homeless encampments or the streets for some as much as 11 years. Coming into our programs, and 88% of them are actually maintaining their stability, becoming tax-paying citizens, paying their rent on time, managing their apartments, reuniting with family. and staying stable in their housing. So those are the types of solutions we wish we were focusing on instead of creating additional barriers for the homeless to have to remove off of their record, find difficulties, as were already stated, in their quest to regain their independence.
And we're going to talk more about those long-term solutions in just a sec. And we do have some clips of Mayor Goodman. But first, we do have a clip with Congresswoman Titus. We had a chance to talk to her. Let's see what she had to say about the homeless ordinance.
Well, I'm not going to second guess the city council, but a lot of that is in my district. And I don't think that you can fine a homeless person $1,000 and expect them to be able to pay it. I've supported some community grants to deal with homelessness, state legislature. I know the county has a new proposal to look at dealing with homelessness, kind of through the training aspect of it, not just putting a roof over people's head, and then the city step in too. Because if the city clamps down here, homeless people will just move here. It doesn't really solve the problem. So we all have to be engaged.
So Heather, let's talk about what Congresswoman Titus said right there at the end, that if you squeeze here, homeless are going to go here.
Oh, absolutely.
We've talked to Mayor Goodman about this. She sees this as potentially being a positive, where then it mobilizes other cities and other areas of the city to provide homeless services here. Your experience, are you seeing this as a positive or negative if we are to see that kind of movement outside of the downtown area?
I agree with Shalimar on a few things here. Not once was my door knocked on, but my door will be knocked on if anyone needs a favor or anybody needs anything from me. And I will always pick up the phone. But in this instance, and this is why I decided not to speak out loud necessarily unless a setting like this, because I don't think that they came to us who run this all day long and are striving for funding, continually. If the nonprofits stopped functioning, the city would collapse on itself. And in order for us to do what we do, we need more money that is not going to have to be hoop jumping all along the way to get it. And then we're super excited when we get it. We need it to survive and to help the situation with this. Finding somebody who doesn't have anything, I don't know how that's all going to work out. The jails are at capacity, if not over capacity. And my concern also is the grave mentally ill. These are people's families, they are people's parents. And that's how I look at that. When people say you can't be an alcoholic, oh, yes, I can. And I came from those kind of situations too. And that's the thing too. I hear so many people with opinions, but who's walking? Who's in action? And that's why I chose not to actually come out and speak publicly, because the fact is that we have to just keep moving what we're doing. If I need to connect with somebody and say, listen, we need help, I will pick up the phone and we will do that. But there's so much noise around this. Where is the action going to come into? And what happens in the whole thing with, foreclosures and evictions and things like that? They need to really, and the whole broad brush to this is what's been frustrating to me. Each individual has individual situation and needs. Just because they're all here doesn't mean they all need the same situation.
And let's talk specifically about mental health, right? We're talking about funding, we're talking about services that are needed. Shalimar, specifically, this is something that Deacon Tom Roberts of Catholic Charities has put a lot of emphasis on, that one of the solutions here, he sees it as a root cause, is getting the mental health care. If we look at the city's data that they've provided, we're serving about maybe 300 homeless in, say, the homeless courtyard, but it's about 20 a month for mental health services, so pretty low numbers.
Yeah.
Is it just a funding issue? Is that what we need to be able to infuse more mental health care into our homeless system?
Funding is one issue, certainly. For instance, the Continuum of Care, all of us who operate permanent supportive housing for including individuals with mental health, there's 1,000 beds in our community, all of which are pretty much full all the time, about 98 to 100% full at any given time. So, and we know that HUD, who is the primary funder for that, has not increased funding for those programs in many years. So certainly, if we're saying the solution and we see what works is permanent supportive housing, but we don't have the funding to increase those numbers, then yeah, funding is the initial issue. Once individuals are housed in that type of housing, then we start looking at all the wraparound services that need to be brought into that housing. And it can happen. It doesn't have to, we don't have to build huge facilities as, the city is saying, well, that'll take us years to do. There's apartments right now we could run permanent supportive housing from, which would, corporate dollars in itself, without even going through government legislation, could fund those apartments. And then we know the solutions of intensive case management, counseling, peer support, connecting and transporting individuals to their mental health and medical appointments. Those things can all be done within the infrastructure that we have now, but we just simply don't have enough units or enough funding to actually provide that resource.
Okay, let's switch a little bit and talk about some of the constitutional rights here. We have seen other cities that have implemented similar ordinances. We have had some litigation around some of our constitutional rights here. Do you see that litigation is forthcoming here once the ordinance is placed in?
Well, it's certainly possible and probable, and I think the challenge would come along the Eighth Amendment, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. And the arguments around the Eighth Amendment are generally whether or not the ordinance punishes someone for a status rather than an action. And the status argument would be that the people who are homeless don't have a choice in that. They're not choosing to sleep on the streets or sleep in a bed. They are forced to sleep on the streets because they don't have a shelter option. And so because they don't have that choice, it's punishing their status as a homeless person rather than the activity of camping on the streets.
Todd, what kind of legal action do you think we're going to see related to this?
So along that argument, we're looking at the Eighth Amendment and how it's impacted because of this ordinance. We're also looking at some of the other amendments. With what the city has been doing in cleaning the streets, we have found instances and people have contacted us and reached out to us to explain how their belongings, their personal belongings, their property is being seized. Their identification, their veterans cards, their social security cards, birth certificates are being thrown in the trash. We've talked to the city many times about this, but they're going forward. We have urged them not to do this. We have told them to stop doing it, but they continue to do it. And so they're essentially throwing away the identity of the individual and seizing their property without any kind of due process. So that's other arguments that we'll be looking at. We're also following closely the Martin case out of Boise that has been appealed to the Supreme Court, is awaiting decision from the Supreme Court currently. We're obviously watching that very closely as well because that will affect what happens in the Ninth Circuit. And right now we're operating under Martin, and what the city proposed we think doesn't even meet the standard that Martin set. So we're looking at all of those things and then we will make a decision.
So we're going to switch a little bit to more long-term solutions here, and we are going to show a clip of the mayor. This is the mayor talking about long-term solutions and specifically how state funding is related to that.
There's no funding coming down. We haven't received any help over the years of any magnitude to do anything, and that's what the city has done. We have finally said, we are going to do something. Everybody else is going to have more meetings and more conversations. There'll be more binders from the meetings, and then the next group will come in, newly elected or newly appointed or newly hired, and will throw out the old binder because they don't like what they were doing. And so this will just keep kicking the ball down the road.
So Shalimar, I want to go to you. Before that, I want to give a little bit of context to what the mayor was saying there. Prior to that clip, she was talking about how in our state legislation we have a 2-year cycle, and that 2-year cycle is leading to potentially not a continuance of what she's mentioning with these binders. But I want to ask you specifically about these binders. I mean, are there these binders here, we're looking at state legislation, or maybe what the Continuum of Care is doing, that are just, there's no concrete movement forward?
Getting public funding to move is a slow process. I'm not denying that. But I think our city can be much more creative, as we have in other situations outside of the homeless situation, in bringing other resources to the table. If I could give an example recently of what was done, local corporation, I'll name them, Sands Corporation, wanted to really join us in the homeless continuum in making a dent in these numbers. So they put forth corporate dollars to fund new permanent supportive housing units. We did the first pilot with U.S.VETS. They funded over $200,000 to do 10 individual housing units to do permanent supportive housing for veterans who've been chronically homeless. 90% of those veterans stayed stable in their housing after a year, including some who had been with extreme disability and who have been extensively homeless for chronic periods of time. So we don't have to depend only on state funding that could take a long time. I mean, let's get creative as a city to do more than that.
If I could,
please.
so AB 73 was the bill that the mayor is referring to. And initially, when Councilman Coffin had introduced it, it was supposed to be a sewer tax. Assemblywoman Neal, the committee chairman, converted that into a real estate transfer tax, and then ultimately decided the best approach was to go back to the region and ask the region how to best fund this so that it was universal rather than each jurisdiction doing it individually. So the state legislature said to the city, go back to the other partners, decide by jurisdiction how this is going to work for the entire Southern Nevada region. That's the place where we're at now, and unfortunately the city decided to go it alone and unilaterally make a decision to start criminalizing the poor and the homeless rather than sitting at the table with the other partners. The county obviously has committed millions of dollars through the marijuana tax to fund housing and homeless services in the county. The city should take a look at something similar to that, or come back to the table and have those conversations with the other jurisdictions so that we can do this as a regional approach.
So with that said, and we asked a similar question to the mayor, she believes in collaboration too. The city wants to see more collaboration. What would be your charge then to the city of how to get from just those conversations to actually taking action in this case?
So I think the hurdle has been the actual implementation. We have lots of ideas. I've sat on committees at the Southern Nevada Public Regional Planning Coalition on affordable housing. Back in 2006, we came up with a whole list of ideas that could be presented to the private sector or potentially even the non-governmental organization sector to build facilities. And exactly how you would do that, how you would get the land, whether it's infill donated from the county or the city. North Las Vegas, Henderson, there are plots of land available that they could transfer at no cost to these entities to be able to build these facilities. There just has to be the commitment and the willpower to do it.
Absolutely.
Shalimar, we've talked a lot about housing, and housing first models have worked in other cities. What else are we missing? We're talking about land, we're talking about funding, we're talking about action here.
Yeah, about supportive services, staffing, additional things. But again, I think we know what models work. Why weren't we invited around the table to say, okay, what are the successful models that are working and how can we replicate that at this point now? I think this ordinance on so many different levels, number one, in terms of how you even enforce it. Let's say, I think, the mayor has spoken to say, at this point, we just need to make them make a choice. So let's say everybody decided, okay, we're making a choice. We don't want to go to jail and we don't want to be fined. Then fine, we'll use a shelter bed. This week there's 1,700 adults without children on our community queue who are homeless and waiting for a bed. Could our city actually support that? Should all of them decide, okay, the ordinance is in effect and, we don't want to be fined, then let's go take a shelter bed. What would happen? And I think we heard her say, the city's not looking for success in this situation. They're just looking for something to do. And it's a futile effort to begin with if we're saying we're not even worried about the success of it. Well, then let's look to what is successful already in our community and can we replicate that instead?
Yep. Nagai, we just have about 30 seconds. I want to go to you. Let's talk about higher courts really, really quickly. Not necessarily just in Las Vegas, but other cities that have implemented this. Do you foresee potentially this reaching the federal Supreme Court level or even our state Supreme Court level with the constitutional rights piece of this?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, the cities have appealed the Boise decision to the Supreme Court, and so they're hoping that the Supreme Court takes it, and we'll see if they do. Our own court could take it and talk about anything from the cruel and unusual punishment aspect to a preemption, right? Maybe the state legislature steps in and has a opinion about what the city can do or cannot do under its own police powers. And that's another area where the state court might weigh in. If I could offer just one more solution, local governments can look at their own ordinances to increase the supply of local affordable housing. So we've talked about planning for identifying land, building new construction. Another thing that we could do is encourage smaller accessory dwellings in infill lots now. That's something that often requires an amendment of the local ordinance to allow smaller shelters to be built. And that's been successful in many cities.
Here's the thing, we are going to come back and revisit this after the ordinance has been implemented. We'll invite some of you back on for that.
Wonderful.
Show. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for joining us today. Now, we've talked a lot about some of Metro's involvement with this ordinance, but yet we haven't really heard just from Metro. So over the past year, they've had a homeless engagement team that's been helping people get off the street. We followed the officers and met some of the formerly homeless people they've helped. Take a look.
I remember this time last year I was running from him Now I'm going to the head station and talking on a panel for Crossroads.
Just 5 months ago, you wouldn't have been able to recognize Dennis Foster. This kind, smiling man was angry, addicted to alcohol and living on the streets.
Metro brought me in off the streets after 14 years of being homeless here in Vegas.
We're utilizing law enforcement to actually bridge the gap between officers, the community, and the homeless.
Dennis is a proud product of Metro's new homeless outreach program. The team of officers patrol the streets, offering resources to those in need.
And at first I thought no one would want to talk to us. But after getting out there, when they see the officers in greens, they know we're here to help them.
I actually came here from Metro. They actually, I came in contact with them. They asked me if I want to help. And at the time I told them yes.
When someone like Alberto is ready to change their life, Metro brings them to Crossroads to get clean and start over. If someone is dedicated to rebuilding, they stay long-term in one of the 85 beds Crossroads offers.
It's incredible, the hospitality here, the camaraderie, staff. I mean, it's amazing. It's a one-of-a-kind place.
Both Crossroads and Metro's homeless unit have been established for a little less than a year. In that time, they've helped over 3,000 people.
I'm just grateful to where I'm at today. I'm thankful for Crossroads and actually the Metro who brought me here. And I still can't wait to see what the future has for me.
To learn more about this program and anything we talked about on our show, visit our website, vegaspbs.org/Nevada-Week. You can also find us on social media at Nevada Week.